Among all the exciting additions to the S.T.A.L.K.E.R franchise brought by Heart of Chernobyl's release, the huge open-world map of the zone is certainly one that was awaited the most by fans. With this new look at the anomalous landscapes came many changes and clarifications to the locations, shifting our perspectives on the zone. Therefore, I propose an interesting and fun exercise related to the new map, trying to figure out the paths taken by the protagonists of the original S.T.A.L.K.E.R trilogy during their journeys. There is a lot to go through, so we will only take a macroscopic look at the matter, as entering into too much details would result in a far too long and complicated video. Let us begin where it all began. Shadow of Chernobyl. Our protagonist, the Marked I, starts in the Cordon, waking up in Sidorovich's bunker after being rescued from a death truck by the S.T.A.L.K.E.R known as Red. The Cordon is almost exactly as it was in the first game, with the same landmarks and layout. Moreover, the Cordon is still located on the most southern part of the zone, all the way down compared to the power plant. Now the mystery remains on how exactly the death truck managed to get all the way down here coming from the center of the zone, but this is a topic for another time. Marked I gets the job to retrieve a flash drive from Nimble, whom he rescues from the bandits at the car park. Then it's back to Sidorovich, crossing the embankment, meeting Fox at the farm and getting a lead on Strelok's whereabouts. A S.T.A.L.K.E.R named Sari, who camps at the garbage, might know something. Just like before, the way to garbage goes through the northern Cordon checkpoint. However, there are two possible paths from there, Wild Island or the Lesser Zone. I very much doubt that our protagonist went through Wild Island, which was probably off limits back then. Therefore, I will consider that he took the road going through Zalesia, ending up in the southern parts of Garbage, as it should be. The place as we remember it has been kept mostly intact in its design, with the three heaps of trash and main buildings in between. The main change boils down to the fact that the Garbage region is now much bigger, with the previous idea of Garbage only representing a small portion of the new location. Well, no matter, it's just a question of expanding the boundaries. Upon arrival, Marked I has the opportunity to give a hand to the stalkers defending the vehicle's scrapyard from bandits, before paying a visit to Sari at the hangar. There we learn about Mole, a digger who found Strelok's stash at the Agroprom underground. The move to the Agroprom, still located to the west of Garbage, keeps us with the spirit of the original, having both a road and the train tracks leading from Garbage to Agroprom. Now they pass through a small part of the chemical plant on the way there, but it's nothing problematic. As for the Agroprom itself, it is similar to its old design as well, with a nearly identical layout and buildings. The same can be said about most of the underground. Our hero rescues Mole from a military raid at the factory, then forays into the catacombs to discover Strelok's stash. The tunnels allow him to sneak inside the Institute, where he steals the military documents requested by Sidorovich and his associates. After this adventure, Marked I has to deliver the documents to Barkeep in Rostok. In order to do so, he goes back to Garbage and reaches Rostok through the duty checkpoint. This is where the pathing starts making less sense, because with the new map, it seems to be much faster to go directly through the wild territory. However, it is possible that anomalies and other hazards were blocking the way at the time. Besides, the duty faction was very picky about who they let inside their territory, which could be why our hero had to present himself at their checkpoint first. So it's a detour, but why not? Marked I goes back to Garbage, passes the duty checkpoint and heads straight to the bar. No problem here, the transition is almost exactly as we remember, so is the road to the factory and the whole Rostok itself. Sure, the place has been slightly rotated, but it remains extremely familiar. and it conserves its overall central position in the southern parts of the zone. After chatting with Barkeep, Marked 1 is sent to Lab X18 in the Dark Valley, located directly to the east of Garbage. Sure enough, there it is. The whole place is now part of the Garbage region, but as stated previously, it is just a question of where to draw the lines between the locations, so no big deal. The valley is thus well positioned and has retained its overall layout on top of that. First, grab the key from the bandit leader Borov, then descend into the lab and find a batch of secret documents. At this point, the military begins an attack on the area, locking down the Dark Valley. Thus, Sidorovich asks Marked 1 to use an old road to the south, leading directly to the road tunnel at Cordon. Here we run into a mapping problem, as this road does not exist anymore. We could imagine that the hero takes an alternate route through Wild Island, but the transition leading to the Cordon tunnel is not possible anymore, simply because this tunnel has no exit. Perhaps the other side of the tunnel is supposed to be outside the playable S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 map, but if this is the case, there would be no way for Marked 1 to get there, since the river cannot be crossed. Unless this bridge was not broken yet. I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, we somehow get back to Sidorovich, then to Barkeep. No problem at all here, we can use the same paths as before. The next step is to look for another laboratory underneath Yantar, located west of Rostok. In order to get there from the bar, Marked 1 had to go through the Wild Territory, a pathing that does not seem to make sense when looking at the new layout of the map. However, we need to keep in mind that the Yantar factory was a source of powerful Psi emissions that could have affected the northern parts of Rostok, not to mention the Brain Scorcher, which supposedly prevented access to the center of the zone. I think this could be the reason why our character decided to take a different route, going around the danger to reach the Yantar bunker safely. In the Wild Territory, a group of mercenaries attacked a scientific expedition, prompting Professor Kruglov to ask Marked 1 for help to escape. The presence of the Mercs may be responsible for the weird transition between Wild Territory and Yantar, where our hero uses the Fury Tunnel. The rest of the journey is anyone's guess. I suppose it could look something like this. The Yantar factory along with the scientific camp remain in a similar shape, but they have been rotated quite a lot and are now standing further north than they used to. There, Marked 1 visits the scientific bunker, potentially helps take Psi radiation measurements, then goes down into Lab X16 underneath the factory and disables the emissions. After this raid, we need to backtrack in order to meet with Guide at the Cordon and then with Doctor at Agroprom. Technically, you could take many different routes to achieve this, so I'm not gonna bother too much about it. Here is one of the possible routes. Let me know what would be your pick in the comments. For now, I'd rather talk about the next important location, the military warehouses. Here we have a major disruption of the continuity between the locations. Indeed, the warehouses used to be located north of Rostok, on the way to the Brain Scorcher and the center of the zone. This is not the case anymore, as the area was displaced towards the chemical plant region, to the south of Agroprom Institute. The design of the place is mostly similar to how it previously was, minus a few details and one important difference in the form of the barrier. The barrier was a checkpoint strategically placed on the road leading to the Brain Scorcher and the center of the zone. It was the last known landmark before the Brain Scorcher, signaling the beginning of its area of Psi influence as well as Monolithian territory. Everything beyond this point was terra incognita for stalkers, a dreaded place where your head boils and nobody comes back from alive. Due to the new position of the army warehouses on the map of the zone, none of this exists anymore. In order to reach the place from Rostok, we'll have to take the road south instead of the one to the north, head towards the chemical plant and cross the river, arriving through the same road that previously held the barrier and from the former direction of the brain scorcher. Obviously, this does not make sense and breaks the continuity in a major way. But why? Why this change? The best would be to have a detailed and official answer from GSC, but I doubt we will ever get that. So instead I will share my opinion on the matter a bit later in the video. I cannot do it yet, because in order for everything to make sense, we need to take a look at the next locations. So let's move on. After passing the barrier, Marked One, now aware that he is a S.T.A.L.K.E.R, would end up at the radar. This is where we was to reach the antennas of the brain scorcher, infiltrate Laboratory X10 and turn down the machine, opening the way to the center of the zone. The location's original design has remained, but its placement on the zone's map has not. In fact, the brain scorcher is now part of a new region called Malachite, situated to the west of the chemical plant and Yantar. This means the brain scorcher was never really located on the way to the zone center, nor within the Red Forest. Or at least the source of the Psi emissions was not. It is interesting to note that in the English version of Shadow of Chernobyl, the brain scorcher area is called Red Forest, but in the Russian version it is known as radar. This implies that the antennas might have never meant to be inside the Red Forest in the first place. I guess the new game confirmed it. I've been fooled, I'll be the first to admit that. Anyway, the fact that the brain scorcher prevented stalkers from reaching the power plant is still very much valid, according to the information found in Heart of Chernobyl. With this in mind, we can imagine that the barrier also existed, though in a different form. Perhaps it was set up around here. I think the Malachite checkpoint would make a good position for it. With the brain scorcher disabled, S.T.A.L.K.E.'s next step was to visit Prypiat in order to find the decoder that would allow him to enter the secret lab under the sarcophagus. In Shadow of Chernobyl, the city was incorrectly depicted just south of the power plant, and loosely connected to the radar via a simple road. This made sense at the time because the idea was to have all the levers building up towards the center of the zone, going from south to north. However, as the series progressed, GSC took a more realistic approach to the zone, creating environments that closer resemble the real-life exclusion zone. This direction was especially obvious in Call of Pripyat, where the city was now back in its real place, that is northwest of the power plant. This approach was kept and even further refined in Heart of Chernobyl, which is why Pripyat is where it is now, disconnected from the radar. This once again poses a problem of continuity, but I understand why GSC chose to make it this way. In fact, I think this was the right decision to please the fanbase, because from what I've seen, a lot of players really enjoy when parts of the zone are recreated faithfully to the real place. That being said, the path taken by S.T.A.L.K.E.R to get there from Malachite is anyone's guess. Perhaps he used the secret tunnels linking X10 to the Pripyat underground, like it was once planned in a cut version of Shadow of Chernobyl's script. Who knows? Of course, all these changes do not help us with the final location visited by S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the Chernobyl power plant itself. Originally, going through Pripyat was the obvious way to get there, but now, with the city back in its real place, it makes less sense to go there prior to raiding the power plant. Yet, S.T.A.L.K.E.R absolutely had to go there first, since he needed the decoder, so he could not just skip the city and head straight for Reactor 4. The question now revolves around how our stalker would have approached the sarcophagus. I assume arriving from the northwest would be the shortest way, which of course contradicts what happens in the original game. But it could explain how S.T.A.L.K.E.R managed to reach the plant alive in the middle of the chaos of Operation Monolith, and before the huge blowout hits. Somehow, he slips inside the sarcophagus, unlocks the door to the monolith control center using the decoder, and discovers the secrets of sea consciousness. After a conversation with the representative, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is adamant about destroying the entity, but it was located further north, in Lab X7 underneath the Dead Valley. Thankfully, he did not have to work there. Instead, he used a series of artificial anomalous teleporters, which we now know under the name of the Navigator. That must be how he got to the Sea Consciousness's chamber and destroyed it, ending the game Shadow of Chornobyl. Looking back, the two main problems of the new map regarding this game are the military warehouses and the radar. So it's time to give you my personal speculation as to why GSC changed their locations. I think everything comes down to the fact that the developers wanted to create a zone closer to its real-life counterpart, as illustrated in the previous segment about Prypiat. As such, putting the Brain Scorcher in the middle of the Red Forest was going to be a difficult task, without involving some major changes to the location, due to the very nature of the radar level. A huge ravine, rocky hills and cliffs, etc. I believe these characteristics don't really belong in the Red Forest, not to mention the fact it would have taken almost half of the entire region, and that it is possible the antennas were never meant to be in the Red Forest in the first place. In my opinion, this prompted the devs to create a new remote location called Malachite, in the only possible spot left on the map, which happened to be in the east. If we assume my guess is correct, placing the army warehouses was the next step, and the most important thing was for the location to be closely connected to Rostok on one side and to Malachite on the other, just like the original was linked with Rostok and radar. Therefore, the spot where to place the warehouses was not really up for debate if these transitions had to be kept. Of course, the result is not ideal, and I don't know if I would have made the same choice in their place, but I kinda understand why they handled things that way. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Now it's time to move on to Clear Sky. The game begins with S.T.A.L.K.E.R leading a group of scientists through the swamps. They get to a ridge with train carts, but the super emission suddenly hits without warning. The location is present in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, where the decaying corpses of the eggheads can even be found. S.T.A.L.K.E.R survived though, thanks to his special ability that would become known as Class 5 Psi Protection. He was picked up by Nimble, who brought him at the Clear Sky base to recover. The faction was very secretive, and the way to their base always remained a secret, which is why it is completely hidden in the fog on the new map. Anyway, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is sent by Clear Sky leader Lebedev to rescue an outpost, but when he reaches there, another blowout hits. He is again brought back to the base, where Lebedev explains the situation about the zone going crazy and the need to stop the stalkers responsible for it. By the way, information found in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 confirmed what we suspected for a long time. The leaders of Clear Sky lied to S.T.A.L.K.E.R and manipulated him into helping them. Anyway, S.T.A.L.K.E.R was tasked with helping Clear Sky troops retake control of the Great Swamp from the Renegades. The location retains many of its iconic landmarks, such as the fishing hamlet, church, pump station, burned farm and observation towers, but also misses most of the others. Besides, the whole swamp have been rotated 90 degrees compared to the original version. After clearing the aforementioned landmarks of Renegade Presence, S.T.A.L.K.E.R was sent to Sidorovich at the Cordon to investigate a stalker who might be linked with the emissions. Well, we got a big problem here. Originally, the swamps were located west, right next to the Cordon, so the transition was remarkably easy. Unfortunately, this is not the case anymore, as the region was moved all the way down to the southeast of the map, completely isolated from the rest of the zone and quite far away from the Cordon. In one hand, this does make a bit of sense, since the swamps were always depicted as a remote location, difficult to access and rarely visited by stalkers. On the other hand, it makes the original transition to Cordon simply impossible. I can see two possible paths for S.T.A.L.K.E.R to take: north through parts of Zaton, then either across the bridge if it still stood back then, or further closer to Wild Island. Or through an unknown path outside the playable area and hidden under the fog that somehow would lead to the Cordon. Either case is not ideal, but well, it is what it is. Let us consider that S.T.A.L.K.E.R managed to get to Sidorovich. Things should get easier from now on, at least for a while. As stated in the part about Shadow of Chornobyl, the Cordon has not changed much. However, we can point out that the ravine leading to garbage that was added in Clear Sky has been removed. Overall, most locations that were featured in both Shadow of Chernobyl and Clear Sky now seem to be closer to their Shadow of Chernobyl counterpart. Anyway, S.T.A.L.K.E.R talks to Sid, then to Valerian at the farm, helps the loners deal with their military problem, and gets word that Fong, the stalker he is after, went to garbage. Same transition as Shadow of Chernobyl. Let's move on. S.T.A.L.K.E.R learns from the diggers that Fang went to the Dark Valley, so he goes there and meets Freedom. Kills the pseudodog near the pond, delivers the ammo by the ravine, discovers the traitor at the farm, then back to Freedom's leader Chekhov to get the info about Fong. He went to the flea market, that slippery bastard. S.T.A.L.K.E.R goes there, gets ambushed by bandits, but learns about S.T.A.L.K.'s group and their stash in the Agroprom underground. Again, same transition from garbage to Agroprom like in Shadow of Chernobyl. S.T.A.L.K.E.R visits the duty base, their leader, General Krylov, hires him to flood the underground. Gets it done and raids the stash at the same time. S.T.A.L.K.E.R went to Lake Yantar, gotta get there by going north through a bog. Well, there it is. Of course, the vehicle cemetery did not exist back then, but no matter, the transition works pretty well regardless. The same cannot be said about Yantar though. Yes, the location is almost identical, but the problem lies in the fact it was rotated. In Clear Sky, S.T.A.L.K.E.R could not pursue S.T.A.L.K.E because he used the Psi helmet to go through the factory and reach the Red Forest. Thus, he had to help the scientists to restart the Psi emitter's cooling system before going there himself. This worked because the factory was north of the bunker, blocking the way to the Red Forest. But now, this narrative falls apart, since you can easily walk to the Red Forest without having to set foot in the factory. Besides, if S.T.A.L.K.E.R really has Class 5 Psi protection, why would he care about the Psi field in the first place? Retcons everywhere! Moving on, S.T.A.L.K.E.R chases S.T.A.L.K.E in the Red Forest along the road leading to Limansk. However, S.T.A.L.K.E gets down into the tunnel and blows up the entrance after him, evading any possible pursuit. The only way for Clear Sky to catch up to him is to go through Limansk, but the bridge to the city has been raised from the other side. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is tasked to find Forrester, who could help figure out a way into Limansk. In order to do so, S.T.A.L.K.E.R has to push through the Red Forest, a location that was changed quite a lot. The main landmarks are still there though, so the continuity of the story is not broken here, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds his way to Forrester's place. Unfortunately for us, this is where the big change about the military warehouses comes back to haunt us. Indeed, Forrester asked S.T.A.L.K.E.R to get to the hills at the warehouses in order to pick up an SOS signal coming from Limansk. This used to make sense because the location was close to both the Red Forest and Limansk, and the terrain there was indeed elevated compared to other locations. None of this is true anymore. Not only were the warehouses taken away from the Red Forest and Limansk, but the developers seem to have forgotten about the fact it was supposed to be on hills, as the terrain is not particularly high up in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. As a result, a part of the main quest from Clear Sky completely falls apart once again. I cannot believe that S.T.A.L.K.E.R would backtrack all the way down to the water tower to catch the radio signal, then run back to Forrester, only to then do it again in order to capture the military antenna. Therefore, I will consider that he got the high ground from somewhere else much closer, up the excavator for example. After that, S.T.A.L.K.E.R retrieves the compass artifact from the renegades in the mines and actually proceeds to the military base, since he needs an antenna powerful enough to contact the stalkers trapped near Limansk. Speaking of which, the military antenna was different in Clear Sky compared to Shadow of Chernobyl, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 decided to go with the original design. After this trip, S.T.A.L.K.E.R goes back to the Limansk bridge to meet with Clear Sky there. The mercs show up as planned and bring the bridge down, allowing access into the city. Phew, now it's mostly smooth sailing from there. Clear Sky pushes through Limansk, which is not in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 yet, but heavily hinted at being added in a future expansion. They reach the hospital and the entrance of the Prypiat underground, that allows them to travel beneath the earth to the CNPP. This is where S.T.A.L.K.E.R has a final showdown with S.T.A.L.K., preventing him from reaching the sarcophagus in time, and resulting in both protagonists being captured and turned into agents of sea consciousness, thus ending the game Clear Sky. Last but certainly not least, it's time for Call of Pripyat. The hero of the story, USS Agent Major S.T.A.L.K.E.R, is sent into the zone to investigate the crash of the Stingray helicopters that were sent in an attempt to capture the CNPP as part of Operation Fairway. His journey originally took place exclusively in regions close to the center of the zone, more specifically around the city of Pripyat. However, the locations from the game have been scattered all over the place in the map of S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Because Call of Pripyat's main story is much less linear than Shadow of Chernobyl's, with S.T.A.L.K.E.R visiting various landmarks in a different order depending on the player's choices, we will first take a look at the location changes, then attempt to figure out the path taken by the protagonist. The Major began his investigation in Zaton, the swampy area located north of Prypiat. On the updated map, the whole Zaton region was disconnected from Prypiat and moved far away into the southeast, stumbling fans upon release. I believe this change was made for two reasons. The first is that some of the real-life landmarks used to inspire the creation of Zaton are actually located in this area of the exclusion zone, and as mentioned previously, GSC decided to create a map that is more faithful to the real place. The second reason is that Zaton was a starting location in Call of Pripyat, and therefore should be placed further away from the zone's center in order to make more sense in terms of progression. While these changes appear reasonable, they do pose problems of continuity when it comes to Call of Pripyat's story. The biggest question mark, in my opinion, is the fact that all locations in the game used to be unreachable due to the influence of the Brain Scorcher. When the hero explores these areas, they have been populated by stalkers only a few weeks prior, and everything here is brand new for everyone involved. However, with the Zaton being taken so far away from the zone's center, how could the Brain Scorcher have prevented access to it? Could it be that other psi fields were responsible? We could imagine that this entire plot point was retconned, but it does not appear to be the case, as demonstrated by an official post by GSC. I quote, "And there was a time when this area was known as part of the legendary Klondike of artifacts, and every stalker dreamt of catching a glimpse of the treasures laying around. Then the brain scorcher was deactivated, and hordes of the starving for new lands adventurers rushed in to be the first explorers. Damn, I miss those times with fellow loners on the S.T.A.L.K.E.R deck after a few drinks at the Beards. Well, the mystery remains for the time being, but it is a topic we will come back to in the future, believe me. Looking at the overall shape of Zaton, the region has been reworked quite heavily, but most important landmarks from Call of Pripyat have been preserved. Moving on to Yaniv and Prypiat, these regions have retained their overall position within the zone, although they have been reworked to better match their real-life counterparts. In Call of Pripyat, the surroundings of the Jupiter factory were available to explore, but this is not the case in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, at least not yet. Jupiter is just out of bounds along with some of the iconic landmarks from the area. Unfinished, but quite in an advanced state. It is very likely that these parts will be added in a future story expansion. Now, getting more into the details, I highlighted all the landmarks that appeared in Call of Pripyat, with a color code depending on the region they used to be found within. Yellow for Zaton, red for Jupiter, and blue for Prypiat. As you can see, the locations seem to form a rough path that the hero may have taken during his journey. The only exception is the Krug antenna complex that has been repositioned close to the Duga according to its real-life location. Rather strikingly, we even get an in-game confirmation through a dialogue that Dektarov did in fact clear out the lair of bloodsuckers located in the basement of the complex. Devil knows what he was doing there so far away from his other objectives. Now, to get into the thick of things, helicopters. The Major needed to investigate all 5 crash sites, thus I also set out to discover their locations in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Unfortunately, this turned out to be more challenging than I thought. All of this being said, we've got enough setup to figure out a possible path for our hero's story, so here is my interpretation of the events. We can imagine that Dektarov's first stop during his adventure was at the Skadovsk, from where he launched his expeditions in the surroundings. Stingray 3 was pretty obvious to figure out, as it crashed on the plateau next to the Snork cave. We can assume that Degi visited Noah at his ark to get his help reach the chopper. The inboard computer revealed 3 possible evacuation points: B2 at the Skadovsk, B205 at the Volkov SAM, and B28 in Prypiat. The Skadovsk was already checked, no trace of the military survivors there. Next is Stingray 5, which crashed in an anomalous swamp. I found 2 places in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 that could fit this description, one in the lesser zone and one in the swamps. The first is far away from all the Call of Pripyat locations, so I doubt it matches. The second is close to Zaton, so it seems much better, but the problem is that it can only be reached after passing through the Clear Sky base, a location that, according to the story, remained untouched for all these years. It is possible that another path existed at the time of Call of Pripyat, or perhaps Stingray 5 is in a completely different spot that has been forgotten. In any case, our next stop should be Stingray 2 that crashed at the Iron Forest. This location does exist on the new map, but remains closed off to players for the time being. It looks like GSC is reworking it into the huge electrical grid just south of the power plant, likely to be added to the game in a future update. I did some out-of-bounds exploration of the area, but could not find any crashed helicopters, though it must be because the place remains unfinished. However, the Iron Forest should have been available for Degi to explore following the fall of the Brain Scorcher, so I assume he went there and found Stingray 2. He would pass through several iconic Call of Pripyat landmarks on his way there. The remaining 2 helicopters are in Jupiter, but first we check out evacuation point B205 at the Volkov SAM. Originally there was a note written by Lieutenant Sokolov, sole survivor of Stingray 4, explaining that he left B205 to take shelter at the scientific bunker near Yaniv station. However, this narrative does not make much sense with the new position of the location, so I guess the K.R just found the base empty and continued to the north. He'd make a stop at Yanov and meet the local stalkers before checking out the last 2 choppers. Stingray 4 crashed through the roof of the Jupiter factory, something present in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 despite being outside the playable area. I had less luck with the Stingray 1, since the helipad location where it crash-landed does not exist on the new map. I believe it should be found in the vicinity of Jupiter, so it must be somewhere out of bounds. Anyway, our hero retrieved the black box and brought it to a technician for decoding, either Nitro at Yanov or Novikov at the science bunker. The encrypted message revealed that all military survivors headed to evacuation point B28 in Pripyat, but the city was impossible to reach at the time. Thankfully, Degi had found secret documents in Jupiter about the underground tunnels that connected the factory's basement to Pripyat. He got to work, putting together a solid crew equipped with closed-cycle protective suits in order to survive the gas that had been pumped in the underpass. The team was composed of Zulu, an ex-dutier excited to get to Pripyat, Lieutenant Sokolov who needed to find his comrades, the jovial stalker Vano, whom Degi helped with his debt to the local bandits, and Strider, a former Monolithian who was accepted in Yanov thanks to the Major's actions. The group went underground and found their way to Pripyat, where they stumbled upon the military survivors who established a base at the laundromat. Colonel Kowalski believed that the helicopters could have been taken down by a special weapon wielded by the Monolith. Thus they confronted the fanatics in a showdown at the hospital, recovering a damaged Gauss gun. Then our hero went to investigate a missing patrol, taking down another Monolith squad at the bookstore. Now he needed to find a technician able to repair the Gauss rifle, and somehow he backtracked all the way to Skadovsk to meet good old Cordon. He sent the K.R to fetch the schematics for the gun, located in an old secret workshop, which is nowhere to be found on the new map. In Call of Pripyat, the testing workshop was located next to the Iron Forest, so it is possible that it should be there in the unfinished location. However, the workshop was also supposed to be an annex to the Jupiter factory, thus it could be that it's out of bounds in these parts. Either way, that's a wild goose chase for Degi, who has to go back to Cordon to get the gun repaired, then head all the way back to Pripyat. He finds a missing sentry and eliminates a controller at the grocery store, then raids the underground Labex 8. Next, he takes down the antenna jamming communications at the kindergarten, prompting S.T.A.L.K.E.R to show up at the laundromat. The legend has come to collaborate with the army and help them get out of here. With the information, an evacuation operation is quickly planned, and all remaining personnel runs to the rescue helicopters at point B28. Despite a Monolith attack, the evac is a success, thus concluding Call of Pripyat. Looking back, the changes made to the map induced many problems for the continuity of the stories told in the original trilogy. However, this was to be expected. We knew that a new S.T.A.L.K.E.R game developed after such a long time would inevitably bring its fair share of retcons, for better or for worse. Ultimately though, the changes are not that big, and the main structure of the originals as well as the lore mostly stayed intact, something that the fans are grateful for. Nowadays, GSC is calling the original trilogy Legends of the Zone, and some have come to interpret it as a pumped-up, exaggerated version of the story, just like it would be told around the campfire. This does make sense in my opinion. For example, do you really think Strelok took down hundreds of Monolithians on his way to the CNPP? I very much doubt it. The games present the player with the flashy gameplay and huge odds to overcome, yet the reality is probably much different. The same can be said about Stalker 2 when you think about it. Skiff in gameplay and Skiff in cutscenes are two different beasts. I do not say this to undermine the legacy of the main characters, as their achievements will always remain legendary, but I do think that a distinction between what is made for gameplay purposes and what is made just for the story should be kept in mind. I'd love to know what you think though, so make sure to tell me all about it in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and good hunting, Stalkers.